My name is Alara Vance. I'm 32 years old, and I design gardens. Not the prim, manicured beds of roses you see in front of suburban homes, but wild, breathing spaces. I work with native grasses that whisper in the wind, with resilient mosses that creep over stone, and with trees that remember the seasons. I've always believed that a space, whether it's a public park or a private courtyard, should tell a story of endurance and quiet growth. It's a philosophy I tried, for a long time, to apply to my own life. I grew up in Port Blossom, a city of perpetual green, cradled by moody hills and a steel-gray harbor. My family, my father, Julian, a distinguished history professor, my mother, Eleanor, a curator of social appearances, and my younger brother, Finn, the artist, lived in a stately home in the Laurels district, a place of old money and even older oaks. Our family, like our home, was built on a foundation of unspoken rules. The most important of these was that Finn was the sun, and the rest of us were planets, existing only to orbit his brilliance. Finn was a painter, a sculptor, a dreamer. His talent was a raw, flickering thing, and my parents shielded it from the harsh winds of reality. They funded his studios, his trips abroad for inspiration, and his series of grand, unfinished projects. I, on the other hand, was the sturdy, practical oak, reliable Alara. I paid my own way through university, took a second job to afford my first small apartment, and worked for 7 years at a large architectural firm before I saved enough to go out on my own. My greatest achievement, the one thing that was entirely and unapologetically mine, was the Hawthorne Loft. It was a sprawling top-floor space in a converted 1920s tannery building overlooking the industrial canal. When I bought it, it was a ruin of exposed brick, splintered beams, and dusty windows that looked out onto the water. Over 2 years, I poured every spare dollar and every weekend into its restoration. I sanded the original maple floors by hand, repointed the brickwork, and designed a small, suspended glass conservatory in the corner where I grew ferns and jasmine. The loft wasn't just my home, it was my sanctuary, a physical manifestation of the life I had built for myself, brick by patient brick. Which is why the world seemed to tilt on its axis when the music at Finn's wedding stopped. It was held at the city's botanical conservatory, a cathedral of glass and steel filled with exotic palms and the cloying scent of orchids. 200 guests, a sea of silk and hushed reverence for the Mercer family, milled around beneath the fronds. The string quartet had just begun a delicate Vivaldi piece when my father's hand connected with my cheek. The sound was sharp, a crack that cut through the music. A violin note wavered, then fell silent. The slap didn't hurt as much as it stunned. It was the sudden, metallic taste of blood on my tongue, the gasp from a nearby guest, the sight of my mother's face, not horrified for me, but for the spectacle. "How dare you be so selfish," Julian hissed, his voice a low tremor of academic fury. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and indignation. I touched my lip, felt the gentle welling of skin. I didn't look at him. My gaze went past his shoulder to my brother. Finn stood beside his new bride, Olivia, resplendent in a bespoke suit he couldn't have afforded. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't angry. He was watching me with a look of detached disappointment, as if I'd just proven a long-held, unflattering theory he had about me. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The confrontation had happened minutes earlier near a fountain draped in ivy. My parents had cornered me there, my mother adjusting a flower arrangement as she spoke, as if this were a casual chat about catering. "Alara, darling," Eleanor began, her voice smooth as river stone. "Finn and Olivia need a proper place to start their life together. The Hawthorne Loft would be perfect for them. It has the space, the light for his studio. You're one person in that enormous place," Julian added, his tone implying this was a matter of logic, not a demand. "It's only reasonable that you'd want to help your brother." Reasonable. It was the word they always used when they were asking me to set myself on fire to keep Finn warm. I had looked at them, at the two people who were supposed to be my anchors, and I said, no, the word was quiet, but it felt solid, heavy as a stone in my hand. The loft is my home. I built it. Finn and Olivia are welcome to find their own. And now here we were. The slap was the punctuation mark on a lifetime of such sentences. It was the period at the end of their long, rambling story about my purpose in their lives. I met my father's furious gaze and felt a strange, chilling calm settle over me. The hurt was there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was overshadowed by a profound, startling clarity. The garden of my life had been trampled one too many times. It was time to build a wall. You're right, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the sudden silence. That was selfish of me. I paused, letting the words hang in the humid air. To have ever thought this was a family. I turned and walked away. My heels clicked a steady, unhurried rhythm on the slate floor. No one called my name. No one came after me. I walked past the stunned faces of my parents' friends, past the trembling violinists, and out into the cool, damp night. The air smelled of rain and soil, a clean, honest scent that washed away the perfume and the lies. I didn't cry. The time for watering dead plants was over. I didn't drive back to the loft. The silence there would feel accusatory, the space too full of a dream that had just been shattered. Instead, I drove to a part of the city that had always felt like a secret whispered between the old brick buildings and the fog. I parked in a narrow alley and walked to a small, unassuming door with a single, hand-painted sign, the Silver Kettle. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of roasted barley and ginger. Soft light glowed from paper lanterns, illuminating shelves of ceramic pots and tins of loose-leaf tea. Behind the long, polished cypress bar stood Mr. Tanaka, the owner. He was a man in his late 60s, with a quiet grace that seemed to absorb the frantic energy of the city outside. He moved with a practiced, meditative rhythm, his hands gentle as he measured leaves and poured water. He looked up as the bell above the door chimed, and his placid expression flickered with something I recognized as concern. He didn't ask what was wrong. He never did. He simply gestured to my usual seat, a small table in the corner, tucked away behind a screen painted with cranes in flight. I slid into the chair, the sting on my cheek now a dull, throbbing ache. I set my purse down, my hands steady. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. It wasn't the wild, hot anger of a fire, but the slow, determined heat of a forge. Something was being reshaped within me. Mr. Tanaka arrived a few minutes later. He placed a steaming cup of hojicha, my favorite roasted green tea, on the table. Beside it, he set a small plate with a single, perfect anmitsu, a delicate cube of agar jelly with sweet beans, and a piece of mochi. On the house tonight, Ilera-san, he said, his voice soft. He looked at my face, a brief, knowing glance at the swelling on my cheek, then met my eyes. Sometimes, the strongest trees must lose a branch to grow toward the sun. I looked down at the tea, watching the steam curl into the air like a prayer. And for the first time that night, my composure cracked. A single tear traced a path down my other cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of fury, for the years I had spent pruning myself back, making myself smaller, so I wouldn't cast a shadow on my brother. For the girl who believed that love was earned through sacrifice. I had spent my life designing spaces for others to thrive in. I'd cultivated gardens of peace and resilience. But I had neglected my own. My own boundaries were like chalk lines on a pavement, easily washed away by the first rain of familial obligation. I sat in the quiet warmth of the Silver Kettle for hours, long after the last customer had left. Mr. Tanaka worked silently, wiping down the counter, polishing his cups, leaving me to the sanctuary of my thoughts. I didn't just mourn the family I wished I had. I began to excavate the truth of the one I actually did. I remembered being 24, working 60-hour weeks at the firm, then coming home to my tiny apartment to work on freelance projects until 2 a.m. Every spare cent went into a savings account labeled the Loft Fund. My father had called it a frivolous indulgence. My mother had worried it was too isolating and not a place to raise a family. They saw it as a whim. I saw it as a lifeboat. Meanwhile, Finn's life was a series of grand, spectacular failures, each one cushioned by my parents' checkbook. There was the artist collective that dissolved into infighting, the bespoke furniture line that produced 3 chairs before he grew bored, and most recently, the immersive art experience called Chroma. It had been his most ambitious project, a warehouse space filled with light installations and soundscapes. It had burned through $500,000 of investor money before closing its doors in less than a year, leaving a trail of unpaid bills and broken promises. My parents had called it a learning experience and quietly absorbed his debts. They had never asked me for a single receipt from my loft renovation. They had never celebrated a single milestone of my career. My success was quiet, steady, and therefore invisible to them. My compliance was assumed. My resources, they believed, were simply an extension of the family's collective assets to be redirected toward Finn as needed. Sitting there, the bitter, earthy taste of the tea grounding me, I opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light on my face. My hands, which had trembled slightly when I left the wedding, were now perfectly still. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was strategic. The landscape architect in me began to see the terrain clearly. They saw my garden as a resource to be plundered. It was time to show them it was a fortress. The next morning, I was woken not by my alarm, but by the insistent buzz of the intercom. The doorman's voice was apologetic. "Miss Vance, your parents are in the lobby. They say it's an emergency." It was always an emergency, and it was never about me. I took my time. I showered, the hot water a balm on my bruised skin. I dressed in a pair of dark, tailored trousers and a simple silk blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe, elegant knot at the nape of my neck. I looked in the mirror. The bruise on my cheek was a faint, violet shadow, but my eyes were clear. When I was ready, I went down to the lobby. I didn't invite them up. They were standing by the concierge desk, a portrait of parental concern. My father, with his hands clasped behind his back, looking every bit the imperious professor. My mother, her face etched with weary disappointment, a cashmere wrap clutched around her shoulders. "Alara, thank God," Eleanor began, stepping forward. "We were so worried. You need to come home so we can talk this through." "I am home," I said, my voice even. I didn't move from my spot by the elevators. "And I'm on my way to work. Some of us have commitments." The jab landed. Julian's jaw tightened. He strode toward me, his composure cracking. "After the scene you made last night, you will not take that tone with your mother." He reached out, his hand closing around my upper arm, his old instinct to command and control taking over. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I simply looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. "Let go of me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Or I will have the concierge call the police." I glanced pointedly at the small, domed security camera on the ceiling. The conservatory at the Botanical Gardens also has excellent camera coverage. High definition, I believe. I'm sure their board of directors would be fascinated to see how one of their most generous patrons behaves in public. His hand dropped from my arm as if it had been burned. Eleanor went pale, her manicured hand flying to her throat. "You wouldn't," she whispered, the words catching. "I'm discovering all sorts of things I'm capable of," I said. I turned and pressed the call button for the elevator. "And by the way, I'm changing the locks this afternoon. Your emergency key will no longer work." The elevator doors slid open. As I stepped inside, I saw their faces, not angry, but bewildered. They were looking at me as if I were a stranger, a puzzle they couldn't solve. They had spent a lifetime underestimating me, and the ground was finally shifting beneath their feet. The doors slid shut, and for the first time, I felt the satisfying click of a boundary locking into place. The silence that followed was dense and absolute. My phone, which I had put on silent, lit up with a relentless barrage of notifications. Texts from my mother, oscillating between wounded sentimentality, "I don't know what we did to deserve this cruelty," and sharp commands, "Call me immediately." Voicemails from my father, his voice tight with the rage he was trying to suppress. Then came the messages from Finn and Olivia, a tag team of passive aggression. Finn: "Hey, Alara. Mom and Dad are really upset. Think you went a bit overboard. Let's not blow this up." Olivia: "We were all just so shocked by your outburst. This was supposed to be our special day." I read each message once, methodically, like a scientist studying specimens under a microscope. Then I muted the entire family thread. I didn't block them. Blocking felt like a reaction, like fear. Muting was a choice. It was a conscious act of deprioritizing their noise. My days took on a new, quiet rhythm. I worked from my loft, the space feeling more mine than ever. I sketched designs for a new public park, a challenging terrace space on a steep hillside. The work was grounding, a reminder of my ability to create order and beauty from difficult terrain. In the evenings, I would go to the Silver Kettle. Mr. Tanaka would greet me with a silent nod, bring my tea, and leave me to my thoughts and my laptop. The sanctuary of the tea house became my command center. It was there that I began to untangle the mess of Finn's last failed venture, the Chroma Gallery. I wasn't a hacker or a financial analyst, but I was meticulous, and I had a good memory. A few years back, when Finn was first pitching Chroma to investors, he had come to me, asking for help with his business proposal. He'd called it just getting my practical sister's eye on the numbers. I'd helped him structure the budget, naively believing he was finally trying to be responsible. He'd emailed me the drafts, the investment documents, the grant applications. Now, sitting in the warm glow of the paper lanterns, I pulled up those old emails. I started cross-referencing names and figures, and I found it. A significant portion of the seed money hadn't come from angel investors as he'd claimed. It had come from the Mercer Family Foundation, a charitable trust my father administered, which was funded by a grant from his own university, earmarked for community arts and historical preservation. My father hadn't just bailed out his son. He had committed fraud, misappropriating university funds to cover Finn's artistic follies. He had gambled with his reputation, his career, and the integrity of his institution, all to protect his golden boy from the consequences of his own incompetence. The discovery didn't make me feel triumphant. It made me feel profoundly weary. The rot was deeper than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about favoritism. It was about a systemic, pathological need to preserve the family myth, no matter the cost. I forwarded the relevant documents to my lawyer, Sophia Rossi. She was a sharp, pragmatic woman in her 40s, with a reputation for being both brilliant and compassionate. I'd hired her years ago to help me set up my business. Her call came the next day. "Alara," she said, her voice devoid of drama. "This is significant. If you were to bring this to the university's board or the state attorney's office, your father would likely lose his position and face criminal charges. Your brother could be implicated as well." She paused. "The question is, what is your objective here?" I looked out my loft window at the slow-moving barges on the canal. I thought of the sting on my cheek, of Finn's smirk, of my mother's panicked eyes. But I also thought of the quiet satisfaction of my work, the peace of my home, the simple kindness of a cup of tea from Mr. Tanaka. "My objective is peace, Sophia," I said, the words feeling truer than anything I'd said in years. "I want them to stop. I want them to understand that the game is over. I'm not a pawn they can sacrifice anymore." "Leverage, then," Sophia said. "Not destruction." "I understand." That afternoon, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. My real estate agent, a friendly woman named Megan, called me with some interesting news. The tannery building, the one my loft was in, was quietly being put up for sale. The owner, an elderly man, was retiring and moving to a warmer climate. There were only 4 residential lofts in the building, and 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor. And then Megan told me something else. A young couple had recently put in an offer to rent the loft directly above mine, the one that had just come on the market. Their names were Finn and Olivia Mercer. Of course, it was their next move. To move in upstairs, to become a constant, pressing presence. To wear me down with proximity, with casual run-ins in the hallway, with the constant, unspoken demand to be let into my life and my home. A slow smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a determined one. They thought they were laying a siege. They had no idea I was about to buy the fortress. I called Sophia back. I need you to help me draw up an offer, I said. On the tannery building. A very aggressive one. The pieces were moving. Not in a chaotic whirlwind, but with the deliberate, quiet precision of a chess game. I didn't feel like a warrior. I felt like a gardener, patiently and methodically pulling up weeds by the root. 2 weeks later, the offer on the tannery building was accepted. The deal was structured through a carefully created LLC to keep my name off the initial paperwork. To the world, and to my family, the building was simply under new management. I was now, officially, my brother's prospective landlord. The silence from my family had become a heavy, pressurized thing. It was the calm before a storm, and I knew it. The first crack appeared in the form of an email from my mother. The subject line was simply, Alara. The email was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It spoke of her sleepless nights, of my father's broken heart, of the shame I was bringing upon them. It ended with a plea. Whatever we have done to hurt you, it cannot be worth destroying your own family. Please, come to dinner. Let us talk. Let us heal. Heal. They used the word as if healing was a process of me forgetting and them being forgiven. I replied with an invitation of my own. You can come to the loft tomorrow at 4. You can come alone. Eleanor arrived precisely on time, dressed in a dove-gray suit, a string of pearls at her throat. She looked around my home, her eyes taking in the high ceilings, the restored brick, the light pouring in from the massive windows. Her expression was a careful mixture of admiration and sorrow. It's a beautiful space, darling, she said, her voice soft. I can see why you love it. I understand now why you were so upset. It was the classic opening move, validate the emotion to neutralize the argument. I didn't play along. I gestured for her to sit on the simple linen sofa I'd bought with my first big design commission. I remained standing. I didn't invite you here to discuss my feelings, Mother, I said. I had my laptop on the polished concrete coffee table. I turned it to face her, a single document displayed on the screen, the grant proposal from the university, side by side with the Mercer Family Foundation's bank statement showing the transfer to Finn's Chroma LLC. Eleanor's carefully constructed composure disintegrated. The color drained from her face. Her hand, resting on her leather handbag, began to tremble. You don't understand the context, she stammered. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice remaining level. I understand that Dad committed fraud. I understand that he risked his entire career to cover for Finn's incompetence. And I understand that you both knew. You chose to protect him, at any cost. I closed the laptop. The quiet click echoed in the large room. I'm not going to the university, I said. I'm not going to the authorities. I'm not interested in ruining Dad's life or sending Finn to court. A flicker of relief in her eyes. It was quickly replaced by suspicion. Then what do you want? She asked, her voice a strained whisper. I want you to listen, I said, finally meeting her gaze. This is not a negotiation. These are the new terms. The loft is mine. My home, my career, my finances, my life, they are all mine. You will make no more demands. You will not send relatives to check on me. You will tell Finn and Olivia that their campaign of harassment is over. You will leave me in peace. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And in return for this peace, my silence about this, I tapped the closed laptop, is guaranteed. If you violate these terms, in any way, the guarantee expires. Do you understand? She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She was looking at the quiet, compliant daughter she thought she knew and seeing a stranger. A woman who had drawn a line not in chalk, but in stone. She couldn't speak. She just gave a single, jerky nod. "Good," I said. I walked to the door and held it open for her. "Then we have nothing more to discuss." She rose on unsteady legs, gathered her purse, and walked out without another word. As she passed, I caught the scent of her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn my entire life. But for the first time, it didn't smell like comfort. It smelled like the past. I closed the door behind her, and the sound was one of profound and final relief. The eviction notice was delivered to Finn and Olivia's trendy, overpriced rental a month later. Not from me, but from their current landlord. Their lease was up, and it was not being renewed. Panicked, they fast-tracked their application for the loft above mine. The application landed on my desk, or rather, the desk of the new, anonymous property manager for the tannery building. It was denied. The reason given was simple, professional, and irrefutable: failure to meet financial requirements. It was the honest truth. Their credit was a disaster, a testament to a life lived on debt and parental bailouts. The frantic text from Finn came that night. "What did you do? Mom said you were involved. You can't do this to us. We have nowhere to go." I looked at the message, the familiar blend of accusation and victimhood. I felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a deep, aching sadness for the brother I once loved, the boy who had become this man. I typed a single sentence in reply. "I have done nothing to you, Finn. I have only stopped letting you do things to me." Then I archived the conversation. 2 weeks later, on a gray, drizzly Saturday, I watched from my window as they moved out of their apartment across the street. I saw my father's car pull up. Julian, looking tired and diminished, helped Finn carry boxes. Olivia directed traffic, her face a mask of sullen resentment. They were moving back into my parents' house in the Laurels. The golden boy, tarnished and humbled, was returning to the nest. I felt no sense of victory, only a quiet, hollow ache. This wasn't a prize I had won. It was a wound I was finally allowing to scar over. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn when there was a soft, hesitant knock on my door. I checked the security feed on my phone. It was my father, standing alone in the hallway. He wasn't ramrod straight like usual. His shoulders were slumped, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tweed coat. He looked like a man weathered by a storm. I hesitated for a long moment, then opened the door. I didn't invite him in. I simply stood in the doorway, a silent barrier. He looked at the floor, then at my face. His eyes, for the first time I could remember, held no judgment, only a profound exhaustion. "They're living with us now," he said, his voice raspy. "Finn and Olivia." "I know," I replied. He looked up, a question in his eyes. "The loft upstairs. That was you, wasn't it? The new owner." I just nodded. He let out a long, slow breath, a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I don't understand how you—" He trailed off. "I'm good at what I do," I said, finishing his sentence for him. "I'm disciplined. I save. I plan. Qualities you always said you admired, just never in me." The truth of it hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. "Your mother," he started, then stopped. "We've lost so much." "I didn't release the documents, Dad," I said quietly. "You stepping down from the Foundation's board was your choice. The whispers you're hearing from your colleagues are the echoes of your own actions, not mine." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if for the first time. The anger was gone. The pride was gone. All that was left was a tired, bewildered man. "We made a terrible mistake, Alara," he whispered. "You made a series of choices," I corrected him gently. "Over 30 years. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. "It's your mother's birthday next week. She's having a small dinner. Just the family." He held it out to me. "She wants you to be there." The word family felt foreign, like a language I no longer spoke. But I took the envelope. His fingers brushed against mine, and his skin felt cool and papery. "I'll think about it," I said. It was the most I could offer. It was more than he deserved. He nodded, turned, and walked slowly toward the elevator. I closed the door, the heavy oak sound sealing the silence of my home. I stood there for a long time, the invitation heavy in my hand, a relic from a life that was no longer mine. I decided to go. Not for them, but for me. To see the landscape after the storm, to know for myself that the ground had truly settled. I arrived at my parents' house late. The air in the dining room was thick with unspoken things. Finn and Olivia sat opposite me, their gazes fixed on their plates. My mother fluttered around, her cheerfulness so brittle it seemed it might crack. My father sat at the head of the table, nursing a single glass of wine, his presence quiet and subdued. No one asked me for anything. No one made any demands. The conversation was stilted, polite, circling around neutral topics like the weather and a new exhibit at the art museum. It was the careful dialogue of strangers navigating a minefield. I observed them all. I saw the faded gleam in Finn's eyes, the weary lines around my mother's mouth, the profound stillness of my father. They were a family portrait that had been fractured and poorly glued back together. And I was no longer in the frame. I was merely an observer. I left early, offering a polite, generic excuse. No one tried to stop me. As I drove away from the big house under the old oak trees, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing. A quiet, peaceful neutrality. The hold they had on me was broken, not because I had destroyed them, but because I had finally, fully built myself. A month later, on the first truly cold night of winter, I hosted a dinner of my own. The guests were not my blood relatives. They were the family I had chosen. Sophia, my lawyer, came, bringing a bottle of bold, unapologetic Rioja. Megan, my real estate agent, brought a ridiculously large bouquet of wildflowers. And Mr. Tanaka arrived with a small, beautifully wrapped box containing 4 kinds of rare, fragrant tea. We gathered in my loft, the space filled with the warm scent of roasted chicken and rosemary. Soft jazz played from a speaker in the corner. We talked and laughed, our voices easy and unburdened. Later, we stood in my glass conservatory, looking out at the city lights twinkling over the dark, slick water of the canal. The jasmine I'd planted was blooming, its sweet scent a fragile promise in the cold night air. Mr. Tanaka raised his small teacup. "To the gardener," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Sophia and Megan raised their wine glasses. "To the gardener," they echoed. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. They thought they were taking my home, this beautiful, light-filled space I had poured my soul into. But they were wrong. My home was never just the brick and the beams. It was the resilience I had built within myself, the quiet strength I had cultivated in the forgotten corners of my own heart. They hadn't taken anything. In the end, they had only given me the space I needed to finally, fully grow.